Okay, well,
Perfect.
thank you very much for the introduction, Dave, and thank you for the opportunity to talk a little bit about forestry and about fire and fire management and some of the things I've seen over the last number of years. As David said, I had a 44-year career with the Ministry of Natural Resources, and it was all in the fire program. So a lot of things changed over those years. And the presentation I want to talk to you today is really based in three parts. One is what I saw over the last 44 years from when I started to write about now. A little bit on emergency management, and certainly now with the emergency management coordinators going into place in a lot of the tribal councils, that'll be pretty important for a lot of people in the future here. And then a little bit about mitigation strategies and things that can be done in order to better protect and better prepare yourself in the event a fire does happen in or near your community. So climate change is something that's been debated for years and years and years. And there's deniers out there, and there's people that believe in it. And we got a good denier just to the south of the border of us there, but I don't want to get into politics. So climate change is real in my mind. And again, I want to emphasize that I am not a scientist. I'm just a forest technician. I went to Lakehead University, got my technician papers, got on a fire crew, and then just worked my way up. But generally speaking, science will tell you that something is happening and things are changing. And climate change is not something that you can just put your finger on and say, this is the exact definition of it. There's all different versions of it. It's not necessarily just the weather's getting warmer. It's all about extremes in weather as well. So you could generally say that things are getting drier and things are getting warmer and the summers are getting longer. Those are general things that you could say, and I'm here today to say that those are things that I have seen. When I started in 1975, it was different than it is right now, and I've got a few pictures to show that. So the fact that some people deny that climate change is something just because it gets really warm one day, well, or really cold one day, those are just daily trends that happen. You have to look at it over a very long period of time. Now in Northwestern Ontario, we have some big influences for us in terms of our weather here in the north, mainly from the plains. So you hear about Colorado lows of systems that come sweeping across the plains, and then stuff that comes across the Rocky Mountains and then sweeps across the plains as well in Manitoba and Saskatchewan. Lots of times that air gets super dried as it comes across. The rain drops as it comes over the mountains. And by the time it hits the boreal forest, we do get a lot of severe weather, a lot of severe storms, and a lot of lightning. So what have I seen over the last 40 some odd years? I see a lot more really high wind days. So when you think about what's going on out there, a lot of trees are getting blown over. That picture on the right, and I've got a few other pictures as we go on here of more trees that have blown down. But you see a lot of that now in the bush, where a large storm, a tornado or a microcellular burst will come, and it does a lot of damage. You don't know about that because the press doesn't care. I won't say they don't care, they just don't report on it. If a windstorm like that went through a trailer park in Barrie, everybody would be there and would be reporting on it. I would say on average, we have 20 to 30 wind events that go through the boreal forest that people don't know that happen unless you fly over it and see it with an airplane. We're also getting desert-like humidity. So that's something that never used to happen before either. When I first started, if you had a relative humidity that was 30%, that was a dry day. Now we get desert-like humidities that are down in the low teens and even in single digits. Unheard of for Northern Ontario. As I said, we get a lot of lightning storms that are very, very severe and sometimes without rain. And then we also have tornadoes. Tornadoes were something that never happened in Northwestern Ontario in the past. Here's one in Red Lake, right around Deer Falls. Some people will remember about 8 or 9 years ago, a tornado came in and it came across the lake. It destroyed those cabins on the right-hand side and actually killed 3 people that just so happened to be from Oklahoma. If you can imagine, coming from Tornado Alley, going up to northwestern Ontario and dying in a tornado in northern Ontario. Very tragic event. What does it cause though in the bush? It causes millions of hectares of damage. And again, we started to try and map that when I was working with the Ministry of Natural Resources, and it's just so hard to keep up on it. There's just so much of it out there. Here's a good example of a whole point. This one's around Atikokan somewhere, Atikokan, right along the highway. Big microcellular burst comes down, knocked everything down on that peninsula. Basically does a lot of damage. That fuel now is on the ground. It dries out and basically becomes a fire hazard. There's another large one. I just put one other picture in there, but just shows that in some places in the boreal forest, the trees are blown down as far as you can see. This one's 30,000 hectares right by Back Lake, which is right beside Pikangikum. So when you heard about all the fires in Pikangikum last year, a lot of that area that was burning was blown down hazardous fuel, which is very hard to fight. There are 10s and 20s and 30 of these type of areas out there that are all spread across northwestern Ontario. You combine that also with a lot of insect damage. We had a huge spruce budworm infestation that went through south of Geraldton over toward Armstrong. That was many years ago, and it's just starting to get back up into good timber now. But now we have a jack pine infestation that's also over in the Red Lake, Kenora, Dryden area. That's going to cause us problems in the future as well, because that just dries out the fuel and makes them more flammable. What it's done is it's changed the whole landscape out there. The landscape now is not the pristine forest that people talk about in southern Ontario. It is actually, and I don't think I have to even tell a lot of you folks that live in the communities, it's a dirty bush out there sometimes. There are still some really nice timber, but to go for a stroll through the bush right now is not that easy. The picture on the left, you can imagine the fire crew with an 80-pound hose pack on their back having to walk through that to get to a fire. It's very difficult, and it is very dangerous. So there's a lot of risk for firefighters. There's a lot of risk for the public. There's a lot of risk for the communities that are in the bush. Again, when I started in 1975, I didn't start work till May 21st, and that was over in Geraldton, and there was still lots of fire or snow in the bush normally in May 21st. Now our ranger crews have to start April 1st, and lots of times they start on the run. As soon as they get hired on, they're on to fires. Here it's the fire started about the second week of April here in the Northwest region, and the first 200 to 300 fires in the Northwest region are person-caused fires. So that's part of the reason why you see a restricted fire zone right now across the province of Ontario, is to reduce the number of person-caused fires across Ontario, so as not to have folks, fire crews having to go into communities to fight fire, and also in combined with the pandemic that's going on, have the potential to spread disease. And again, we're also going later into the fall for fires. This was October 10th in Geraldton, when we had 139 active fires one day, and then we got snow. So then we laid everybody off and went home. That was enough. That was a long year. So with that, so we're getting longer fire seasons. They're hotter. There's more fuel out there to burn. The humidities are bad. The winds are bad. We're going to get big fires. Our challenge is, where are they going to be? How will we manage? And what can we do? What can you do to better be prepared? There's going to be situations where there are going to be evacuations. In northwestern Ontario, most of the evacuations that do happen are because of smoke. Not very often does the fire overrun a community, but that will happen, and it could happen. And you saw that in places like Grand Prairie, Alberta, Fort McMurray, and all the tragedies that go on in Australia last year. We have to be prepared for that. But for the most part, our evacuations are with smoke. When a fire does approach a community, the Ministry of Natural Resources will do whatever is possible to stop that fire, to stop it from going into a community. We have water bombers, we have crews. They have water bombers, they have crews, they have helicopters, and critical infrastructure, communities, human life is their priority. So they'll always take a front road. But no matter what they do, there's always going to be situations where some values will be lost. It's nice to be able to get in ahead of a fire and put up sprinklers, but that's not always possible in the busy years. So this slide here is a very important slide. And really it's all about an emergency management plan. And I'd be glad to hear Nick's comments on that at the end of the talk here as well here. But every community should have an emergency management plan that talks about what to do in the event of fire, how to handle themselves, and what's going to happen. It's really good to see right now the emphasis being put on First Nations communities to hire emergency management coordinators. Nick and Sulika with IFNA just been hired on. Jamie was just hired on in Nokiwan. I know they've hired a few others. I just don't know who else. But those individuals will be critical in order to helping to prepare these emergency management plans. Unfortunately, they got thrown into this pandemic, which takes away from some of their time. But certainly, this is going to be a challenge for them when they get moving on. One of the things that you really need to know in a community level is who is in your community and the family members and the condition of those family members. So when a fire or a smoke event happens at a community and an evacuation is going to take place, and if evacuation is going to take place, it's mainly because the chief has declared an emergency. So the chief is the ultimate authority in that community and has the power to make that declaration. He normally, or she normally would do that under the advisement and under the consultation of a number of different people, whether it is the police, it'll now be with the new emergency management coordinators, it'll be with the health unit folks that are in the community as well, looking to see how the smoke is affecting some of the individuals, and it also will be with the M&R fire program. It's important that the community knows who's in the community, how many people are in the community, and the condition of those folks, because normal emergencies and evacuations start with a phase 1 evacuation, which is sick and elderly and some of the young folks. So it's important to know who those people are, so that when an incident happens, lots of times you don't have a lot of time to get ready. So it's best to have that in your plan, ready to go, and how you contact them. As well, if you're going to be evacuating your elders and folks that have got respiratory problems, etc., you need to know who are the individuals that are going to be going with those folks as caregivers. So that's the same with young kids. If you're going to be sending out the young kids, well, the family members have to go. So those are also should be part of your phase 1 evacuation plan. Another real key component is to know where you would like to go as a community, because normally, again, the chief will have a lot of influence as to where he would like to go. Under normal circumstances, the folks in a community and the leadership of the community won't be told you are going here. They'll be given options. So it's good if the community has options as to where they would like to go and have that identified in their emergency plan. As well, in their emergency management plan, you should know where all your critical infrastructure is and what has been done and what could be done to protect some of that critical infrastructure. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when I go to the next plan, which is around community wildfire protection. So again, I believe the emergency management coordinators will be able to talk a lot more on this at a later date, and that might be something you might want to do a larger conference on, David. And I do know that Nick was trying to set up a conference just on emergency management as well with First Nations communities. So the next program I want to talk about is FireSmart, and FireSmart is just that: is how can you be smart with fire? How can you better protect your community? How can you as an individual? How can you as a community? And how can you on a larger landscape better protect yourself, better be prepared for fire, better have your residents and your community prepared for when a fire comes in so that the risk is reduced? there are a number of principles that are available through FireSmart that talk to, and I'm going to talk to a few of them here in a moment. But there's some things that you can do ahead of time right now in terms of brushing around the community and cleaning up and moving stuff around away from your residents that can clean up a property and make it more fireproof. This little manual here, it's about a 4 or 5 page manual it says FireSmart manual. Those manuals are available through the local fire management headquarters. I've got some that I could send you as well, David. I could send you a dozen that you could, or so, that you could send out to members of your group with climate change. And also I have some that in the past where I've gone and talked to with your climate change folks, or with some of the emergency management prevention stuff, where I've got some copies I could bring. But really it just discusses what you could do in order to make your property more protectable and less at risk to burn when a fire does come within the community. This checklist is really hard to see, but it's going to be on your Facebook website. I sent it to David earlier, so I said you're free to post that up onto your Facebook page. But it's just a checklist that talks about all the things that can be done in a resident to make it more fireproof. Granted, these are Southern Ontario pictures that you see here, but the same principles are present in the north and in the First Nations communities. So the one thing that I want to talk about is as well as having a emergency management plan that talks about where you're going to go and who's going to go and where your critical infrastructure are, it'd be good to have a community wildfire prevention plan. And what that prevention plan does is it develops mitigation strategies, just like I talked. It looks at FireSmart and it looks at your community as a whole, and it breaks it down into subdivisions and tries to figure out where and what could you do to make that community and make that subdivision or make that individual resident more fireproof. And it lays out a number of strategies. It also will look at the area around the community and analyze what the hazard is around it, and moderate, low, or high hazard, so that you could see where the problem areas are. There are a number of these community wildfire prevention plans that have already been developed for communities. There's been about 20 that were developed by the Ministry of Natural Resources that I'm hoping that they're going to start rolling out to the communities here this spring. And as well, Nick was proactive with IFNA and received some money from INAC, or I have INAC, which is the old form, but it's Indigenous Services Canada. Indigenous Services Canada is willing and has been pretty proactive at funding the making and the production of these community wildfire protection plans. Normally, these plans, there's providers out there that can develop a plan for you. There is funding that could be available through Indigenous Services Canada, and it costs normally around $6,000 to $7,000 to develop a plan. It takes probably about 3 or 4 months to develop a plan, and normally has to be done in the summertime so you can see what the fuels are out there. But once you have a plan done, then you can look at the mitigation strategies in there, and I'm going to show you a couple. But then if you have a plan and you have identified mitigation strategies, then you are in better stead with Indigenous Services Canada to go to them through their programs and ask them for money and for funding to pull off some of these programs. This is just a very small, simple FireSmart treatment hazard reduction job that was done in Wabaseemoong over in the Kenora district. We had a bunch of larger projects that were going on in Wabaseemoong. This was as simple as going around the community and identifying houses that were at risk if the event that a fire started in the community. Wabaseemoong was a community that traditionally had 15 to 20 fires every year. It was in the dry grass period. Lots of them were just carelessly started by whatever was out there. It catches into the grass on a windy day, and then it'll burn a house down. The bottom picture even shows, if you look on the right-hand side of the door, it is actually singed on the side of the door from a fire from earlier years. So by hiring a few people, going around with brush saws and cleaning out around the houses, by moving any flammable debris away from the house, that makes that house more fire resistant, more fireproof, and it also makes it more defensible in the fact that if it did get a fire approaching the structure, it would be much easier to put that fire out because the fuel has been removed. Also, as part of this program here and the other programs, when we cut out any larger pieces of wood, we took all that wood and we cut it up into firewood and brought that to the elders in the community. Again, it was a FireSmart program. It was to reduce the fire hazard, but it was also successful in building relationships with the community. This is another project that was done across the Northwest region. Approximately 20 waste sites were looked at. And I noticed in the introductions, there were a couple folks online here that are waste management specialists. Indigenous Services Canada also funded the M&R at the time. This was going back 3 or 4 years ago, to go and look at the dumps, and we sold this project as a FireSmart program because these dumps, and I'll be honest, a lot of them are in very poor shape, in some, especially in some of the northern communities. The garbage is not confined to a pit area, and the garbage extends all the way into the bush line. So when a fire starts in a garbage dump or a waste disposal site, it has a free run through the garbage into the standing timber, and then most of these waste disposal sites in the north are relatively close to a community. So then the fire gets out of the dump, into the trees, like that picture on the bottom right, just starting out, and then it runs through the trees and then toward the community. In Northwestern Ontario, I would say there are 30 fires every year that are attributed to dump fires, somebody going in and starting a dump fire and then it getting away. So that's an important message for climate change folks and for emergency management coordinators. So talk to the individuals locally, just to emphasize the importance right now of not starting dump fires, because certainly the M&R doesn't want to come into a community to deal with a dump fire right now. So again, what we did with the dumps, we were successful in getting money from Indigenous Services Canada, and I believe that a local community at the local community level could exercise that same attempt to get money from Indigenous Services Canada. We got about $50,000 per dump. It allowed us to hire a few people to go around and clean up areas leading into the dump. And it also allowed us to hire heavy equipment to clean it all up, to push the existing garbage into a pit, to redevelop the pit, and to put up some signage that try to encourage people to make sure they put the garbage in the pit, and also to restrict them and to try and encourage them not to light the dump on fire. This was a very successful program that probably, as I said, we completed at least 20 dumps across the region, and there's more folks out there that were interested. So that's one that could be pursued. Another area that could be pursued in terms of communities with high fire occurrences, especially in grass fires in the spring, is to burn off some of that grass in the springtime. I do want to say right off the bat, though, that this is very tricky, and it's dangerous, and you need to know what you're doing. This is one where I believe if somebody is interested, the first step would be to go and talk to the local fire management folks at the local fire headquarters level and talk about what the problem is and brainstorm on what some of the solutions are. We looked at this at a regional level across the region and picked 3 areas that were high fire prone areas and high fire occurrence. Wabasmong was one, Mishnagugumung was another, Fort William First Nation was another. A lot of spring grass fires, so in consultation with the chief and his staff dealing with the local fire management headquarters, were able to come up with a plan. They were able to write plans, identify areas that traditionally burnt every year, and go in each spring and burn them off. What that does is it burns off that dry grass. It greens up the area very quickly, and the area that would normally be burnt under unplanned conditions with somebody dropping a match are already burnt. So it reduces the risk to the community. It reduces the chance of somebody getting hurt, and it reduces the chance of a fire running and burning a structure. Again, there was money available through Indigenous Services Canada to carry out these operations, which are relatively cheap in the spring of the year. The one thing that all of these programs, whether it's building dumps or fixing up the dumps or fixing up around the houses or cutting firewood or doing educational presentations, is it builds relationships. And that's the important part that David had mentioned earlier. We really, from a government perspective at the time, wanted to ensure that when a fire happened at a community, you know, the Ministry of Natural Resources and Fire Program could come in, could deal with the chief and council. It could be positive. There could be a positive effect of having the relationship and going in and talking to some of the kids. Made a real effort to try and get firefighters to the community to promote the program and do what they could to increase the awareness of the dangers of fire in the springtime. One final mitigation strategy, and this is White Sands. This is up in Armstrong. This is just the planning map. Since that map was taken, we completed a $50,000 project that basically put a fuel break around the whole community. So started from the north end of the community, cut out the timber around the edge of the community, tied into lowland areas, tied into existing roads, went in over the last couple of winters with D8 bulldozers and built a fire break around the community of White Sands. What that does is it allows for a bit of a break. So if a fire was running at the community, hopefully then when it hit the fire break, it would drop down and take the oomph out of the fire and slow it down. There certainly would be spotting that would come across that fire break, but that would be easier to control than a full-fledged engaged wildfire coming toward the community. So basically, that's what I wanted to cover, David. A little bit about you know, my thoughts on climate change, and climate change is real, and it's going to be a lot of fires out there in the future. The challenges are going to be increasing for firefighters and communities and everybody that's living on the landscape. And the more we work together, the more we do things proactively to mitigate measures, to put mitigation measures in place, the better chance we will have in terms of the Ministry of Natural Resources, the community, and Ontario in general to protect those properties and protect the citizens of Ontario. So again, I think that that's about all I wanted to say there, David. I hope that covered what you wanted me to cover, and I'll throw it back to you.